Rare is the wine that spends more time in a barrel. Rare are the vineyards that flourish in a more harsh and unforgiving land. Rare is the grape that is harvested by hand and crushed by foot. The wine is port, and this is Ports to Remember. A discovery of port wine from the grapes to the glass. Come, savor the wine. Harvest the grapes. Get to know the place and the people whose lives have been wrapped in the joy of port wine for generations. Join your host, wine writer and connoisseur Tony Aspler, in this celebration of Ports to Remember.
Hi, I'm Tony Aspler, and this is Ports to Remember. In this edition, we visit the world's youngest port house, Churchill's. And this is their latest vintage. Think of a beach in Portugal, and you conjure pictures of warm surf and sunshine. In the north, however, near the upper border with Spain, the Atlantic Ocean is cold, and fog can obscure the sun for an entire day. Besides, people here are normally too busy for sunbathing. Porto and Villanova de Gaia, the cities on either side of the Douro River mouth, form the commercial hub of Portugal. More than 50% of Portugal's business happens here. On the south side of the river, Villanova de Gaia is home to the lodges of the port producers. Its narrow streets and old buildings evoke the long history of this city. The granite walls of the Churchill Lodge have stood for 200 years. Hello.
Yes?
I can hardly wait to see what I will find inside. With me is the new kid on the block, John Graham, who actually created the first new port house in over 50 years. Now, John, I want to start a port house myself. What do I need, apart from lots and lots of money?
Well, that's true. You need lots and lots of money.
How much does it cost to set up a new port house?
Well, you need a lot of goodwill, firstly.
Yes.
And we were fortunate that we got that from all of our competitors here, yes, who were very friendly. You need, obviously, to have some credibility, which is not only gained from the quality of your port. I was fortunate that because my family had been involved in the business, that there was an immediate association with port.
Right. So what do you need? You need a lodge?
You need, in those days when we set up, you needed to have a lodge in Villanova de Gaia.
Yes.
You needed to have a minimum stock, to have an adventurous spirit, I think is probably what you could say.
What is the minimum stock?
It used to be 150,000 litres of port, which is approximately 270 pipes. Port.
John Graham's efforts are also blessed with luck. The Douro region, where port grapes grow, is about 100 kilometers up the Douro River from the port lodges. It's divided into thousands upon thousands of quintas, or grape farms, both large and small, and some produce better grapes than others. The weather here is generally hot and dry in summer, bitter cold and wet in winter, conditions that favor the production of quality port grapes. Within those extremes are smaller areas that have slightly better conditions. One quinta, for instance, may have an exposure that gives it a little more sun than its neighbors, and thus, more often than not, it produces riper grapes. When John Graham set his sights on a new port company, 6 of the better quintas had just been released from their contract with other port producers. They agreed to supply their newly fermented wine to John Graham and his new Churchill Port Company. In 1999, Churchill also bought a quinta of its own, Quinta de Grisha, in the heart of the finest port wine producing area. The predominant grape varieties here at Quinta de Grisha are Touriga Nacional, Tinta Roriz, Touriga Francesa, Tinta Barocca, and Tinta Cao. A blend of these 5 varieties make John Graham's port.
I'll pour. I've got here a young vintage port.
As it is with wines around the world, the production of port is strictly controlled to maintain standards of quality by all producers. When a year brings John Graham a wine he thinks is good enough to be declared a vintage, he sets it aside, ages it for 2 more years, and then checks it again. If the wine still meets his standard, he submits it to the IVP, the Instituto do Vinho do Porto, or Port Wine Institute. It is they who will make the final decision, as they do for all port houses. The Port Wine Institute is housed in a handsome 4-square Georgian building in downtown Porto. Inside, the wide granite staircase leads up to the mezzanine. The stone, set in the center of the stairway, originally marked the boundary of the port wine region in the Douro, the first demarcated wine region in the world. Paulo Barros, technical director of the Port Wine Institute, gives us the privilege to bring our cameras inside, something that does not happen very often.
Hi, with me is Dr. Paulo Barros of the Port Wine Institute, and we're here in the tasting room. Now, these wines look like they're in mourning, in their little black bags. What exactly are these?
Como uma das funções principais do Instituto é o controle de qualidade.
All port wine samples come to the Institute anonymously, and their anonymity is strictly preserved. Paulo Barros tells me that all producers must submit all their wines to the Institute, and they must be certified before they can be sold. Naturally, taste is the first prerequisite. The environment in the tasting room is strictly controlled.
Isto, de facto, é a sala de prova do Instituto de Vinho do Porto, uma sala especial.
Not even sunlight enters, to make sure that every wine is tested under exactly the same conditions. The color, bouquet, and taste must meet rigid standards. The chemical structure of the wine is analyzed through gas chromatography and must be approved. In every way possible, the quality of port must be maintained. Once approved, port wines will all carry this white seal over the neck of the bottle, stating the words Garantia do Vinho do Porto. This guarantees the wine has been grown, aged, and bottled in Portugal. Without this seal, it's just not port.
Dr. Paulo Barros, thank you very much. Well, I'm Tony Aspler. Stay with me for more Ports to Remember. Welcome back to Ports to Remember. I'm Tony Aspler, and with me is Maria Emilia Campos, who is the marketing director for Churchill Port, and I hope you're going to show me around.
Yes, okay. So it's my pleasure, Tony. I will.
Thank you. What about women and port? I mean, women obviously buy port. Do more women than men buy port? Is it changing? Is that happening?
I hope that the thing changing, and of course we are trying also to appeal more the female, the women's accessibility, and so because we have, for instance, the case of our white port. Lots of women love our white port. We have, you know, all the different ages, people from different, you know, so, and they love. They really come for, and they ring and they write and they say lots of things about they are port lovers. It's sure, you know.
Now, you were born in Villanova de Gaia, weren't you?
5 kilometers away from
And
here.
you've spent all your life here. When was the first time you actually tasted port?
Well, if it is before, I don't remember, but what I really do, it was my father that opened the vintage port when I was 15, and so I tasted for the first time a vintage port.
Is that right?
Yes.
Now,
yes.
what is your favorite style of port? What do you enjoy drinking every day?
Okay, you always have the day-to-day, and I really like the 10 years old, but I like it chilled as a summer drink. And then you have the LBV for the winter. And of course, if you want to impress someone, you will open a vintage port, you know, yes. But that's just when I have friends or I have a special occasion I will have. And really, a vintage port can impress very much your friends if you have all that, you know, ceremonial around it. And then most of Portuguese people doesn't drink or never taste a vintage port. And that is really what I normally do here at home. I want to show you something very special here.
Oh, wow. Now that's my idea
yes.
of a cellar. Look at that, cobwebs and all. And look at all these vintage ports lying down.
Yes.
So what have you got here? What vintage is
so
this?
you have there, Água Alta 90. Yes.
So that's the single Quinta 1990.
Yes, Água Alta. And then
on
you
the
have
side
here Vintage 91.
Yes.
Yes.
And now look, this is what I want to ask you about, the white painted marks on the bottle.
Yes, the splash mark in the bottle.
Why do you do that?
Okay, so the vintage is here, well sleeping, you know, the vintage has the perfect conditions. And so people, when come to pick the bottles, that means that all the deposit from the vintage port have been dropped this way.
Right.
You know, it must continue to drop that way. So if you are buying me a bottle, you know, of course then you have the label, and that will tell you this is the way of putting the bottle in your cellar.
So you label it where you have
the splash mark. So the deposit will be always in the same side. You know, you will not change the bottle, or you will not move. So everything will be the way it starts to sleep. Okay, because I normally say that the wine is here well sleeping, you know, as you can see around.
When Churchill purchased this lodge, it was little more than a rocky shell. Only the granite walls were still standing. But in the years since, they've made many changes. Some of these storage tanks are quite modern. But I'm glad to see these traditional wooden pipes. In this cellar, the air is redolent with the smell of old port and oak. And I'm sure the process of tapping the pipes makes a significant contribution to this wonderful scent. You know, that pipe, that wooden cask they're wrestling with, contains about 600 liters of port, or about 50 cases. That's why it's so heavy, but once it's in place, it can stay for many years. One of the more modern sections of the lodge is the bottling line. Cleanliness is most important here, but the sound echoing off the stone walls and concrete floor is quite deafening. That strip of paper you see going over the top of the bottles is the certification number from the Instituto de Vino de Porto. It says the port has their approval. On our way back through the cellars, Maria Emilia Campos and I meet a group of tourists visiting the lodge, and they have John Graham as their guide.
If it's a vintage style, a vintage character, or a port that you want to retain colour, we tend to keep it in larger vats where there is less colour loss. Okay. Now, if we want to produce a tawny style of port, we'll age it in these traditional port pipes. Now, this is a traditional port pipe, which is about, they vary.
I asked a couple of the people on the tour what they think of their visit.
It's very nice to see still the old buildings and the old casks and the hands-on type of work that's involved with it.
The old way of doing things survives throughout the port trade. In the lodges, in the vineyards, at the quintas. I'm sure John Graham's forebear, who came to the port business in 1780, would still find much of the process entirely familiar. Some things, however, would be completely beyond him. Things like marketing port throughout the world.
I'm sitting here in the headquarters of ISEP, in the beautiful building of the Bolsa Palace in downtown Porto. And with me is the director of ISEP, José Manuel de Fonseca. Tell me, what is ISEP?
ISEP is a public agency responsible for mainly the promotion of Portuguese exports worldwide.
How do you go about promoting port to North Americans?
Port wine is a very, serious wine, and it's almost seen here like a religion. And I think the countries like United States and Japan and so on appreciate a lot the decor of the port wine.
The ritual.
Yes. The historic side of the port wine that is very important also for us. Port wine is a label with 300 years.
But you're promoting port, you can't promote specific ports, right?
Yes, we are a public agency, so our promotion is a port wine. We promote the port wine, not this label or that label.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember your first glass of port, the first one you ever had?
No, I don't remember, because I have 40.
You've been drinking it for a long time, eh? Good, but I think that's our cue to actually have a glass of port, wouldn't you say?
Yes, it
Splendid.
It arrives.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Well,
it's a good color.
It is. Cheers.
Cheers.
I'm pleased to be counted among those who appreciates port. And here in downtown Porto, I know the right place to go and enjoy it. Stay with me. Ports to Remember will be right back. Porto, across the Douro River from the port lodges and Villanova de Gaia, is a lively, energetic city. In many ways, it's very modern. In as many others, it's almost as old as the hill on which it's built. People talk on cell phones in front of buildings that have stood for centuries. Artists pose in front of Baroque buildings, busking for change. People stride with purpose, on their way to a meeting perhaps, while others take the time for a leisurely game of cards with friends, or try to catch a fish. And you know, I don't think he cares whether he gets a bite or not. I find Porto a fascinating city, with wonderful restaurants, affordable hotels to stay in comfort, and sights to visit. And one of my favorite places to visit is the Solar do Vinho de Porto. It's open to the public, and it's a must-visit for port lovers. Here you may order by the glass any port produced by any of the port companies.
This seal on the neck of a bottle of port is your guarantee that what is in the bottle is what it says on the label, and it's given to the port producers by the Port Wine Institute. Thank you. With me is Jose Remigio Melorado from the Port Wine Institute, who's going to explain how those bottles come to get those labels. If you look at a port label, all the language is English. You call it vintage port, you call it tawny, you call it ruby, vintage character. Why, as Portuguese, do you use the English language on the label?
Como sabe, ou penso que sabe, na origem do vinho do Porto sempre estiveram os ingleses.
The labels are in English, he says, because so many of the producers who have been in the port trade for generations are British. And to be very practical, it's easier to sell around the world when the product description is in English.
What about the use of the name port by other countries, not in the economic community, but outside in the United States, in Canada, Australia? How do you protect the name of port?
Neste momento, as nossas atenções estão concentradas.
The name port wine, he explains, is protected around the world. In other countries, labels may include the word Porto, but the country must have an agreement with Portugal and the Instituto de Vinho de Porto.
One of the great matches in all of gastronomy is vintage port with Stilton cheese, or any other blue cheese for that matter. And here we have a gorgeous slice of Stilton and a blue Danish and a glass of vintage port. Who could ask for more? You've been watching Ports to Remember. Join me for the next program in the series.